A struggling mechanic sheltered a starving Omega and 2 children for one night, changing his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jake Sullivan had never been lucky. A mechanic by trade, he spent long hours working in a dusty garage on the edge of town, barely scraping by. His small apartment was a clutter of tools and half-finished projects, with the occasional glimpse of a life he'd always dreamed of but never could quite grasp. Despite his hard work, bills piled up, and the promise of a better future seemed forever out of reach. His world was routine. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, and repeat. But everything was about to change one cold, rainy night. Jake had just finished another exhausting shift, his hands raw from hours of labor. The storm outside was fierce, wind howling and rain battering against his car as he drove home. He was tired, so tired, but there was a nagging feeling that he couldn't shake. He drove slowly through the empty streets, the glow of the streetlights flickering against the wet pavement. That's when he saw them. A figure stumbling along the sidewalk, barely visible in the rain, and 2 small children clinging to the person's sides. It wasn't hard to see that they were in trouble. The figure was thin, too thin, and there was an unmistakable look of desperation in their eyes. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He knew he couldn't just drive past them. He didn't have much to offer, but he had to do something. Without thinking, he pulled over and rolled down his window, calling out to them, trembling from the cold. Evan's voice cracked as he explained that they had been without food for nearly 24 hours, and they had nowhere else to go. Jake's mind raced. His first instinct was to turn away. He had nothing to give them. His own fridge was empty, his pockets light, but something inside him told him he couldn't leave them out there. Without hesitation, he opened his door, asking them to get in. Evan hesitated at first, clearly overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger, but finally, he and the kids climbed into the car. Jake didn't know how long it had been since he'd helped anyone. He barely had enough for himself, but he knew what he had was enough to get them through the night. He drove them to his small, modest apartment, the warmth of the car's heater slowly bringing some comfort to their cold, shivering bodies. He couldn't offer much, but he could offer shelter. When they arrived, Jake made a simple meal, nothing fancy, just soup and some bread, but it was enough to fill their empty stomachs. As they ate, Jake could see the relief in Evan's eyes, the kids slowly starting to relax as the warmth from the food and shelter seeped into their bones. That night, Jake gave them more than just food and shelter. He gave them hope, and in return, his life would never be the same again. After they entered his apartment, Jake quickly made them comfortable, guiding Evan and the 2 children to the couch. The small living space wasn't much, but it was warm and clean, a refuge from the cold night outside. As the children huddled together on the couch, their tiny hands clutching each other for warmth, Evan sat quietly beside them, clearly exhausted. Jake could tell they had been through a lot. The little girl, Lily, no older than 5, kept her head down, her eyes darting between the strangers in the room. Her brother, Noah, was a little older, maybe 7, but his eyes were just as wary. They didn't speak much, just silently accepted the small amount of comfort Jake had offered. Jake could feel the weight of the silence in the room, so he started talking, trying to break the tension. "You guys must be starving," he said as he served them bowls of soup. "I don't have much, but it's hot." Evan looked up, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." His voice was soft, almost cracking. "You don't have to repay me," Jake replied with a reassuring smile. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Jake couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He was barely scraping by himself, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't turn them away. Evan had explained that they had been living on the streets for the past few days, moving from one place to another, barely finding food. His story was heartbreaking. He had once had a family, a job, a life, but everything fell apart after his wife passed away, leaving him to raise the children alone. Life had become a never-ending struggle. "I've tried to get back on my feet," Evan continued, looking down at his hands. "But it's been hard. I've been looking for work, but no one will hire me, not with the kids." His voice trailed off, and Jake could hear the pain in his words. Jake nodded, not knowing what to say. He had heard stories like this before, but seeing it firsthand made it feel different. I get it, Jake said softly. Life's tough. There was an awkward pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people, who don't really know each other, connect on a level that words can't explain. Jake moved to the small kitchen and grabbed some bread. It wasn't much, just a loaf of cheap white bread, but it was enough to offer. He set it down beside the soup. You can have as much as you need. Evan smiled, a small, genuine smile, one that didn't reach his eyes completely, but showed some relief. Thank you. The kids had already started eating, their small hands grabbing the bread eagerly. The warmth from the soup and bread was beginning to fill their bodies, and Jake could see the tension start to leave their shoulders. It was strange how something so simple, so small, could make such a big difference. I'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, Jake said, moving to the small fold-out couch that was pushed against the wall. I'll find some blankets. You don't have to. Evan started, but Jake waved him off. It's fine. You've been through enough tonight. As Jake pulled out the blankets and set up a space for them to sleep, he couldn't help but think about how quickly things had changed. Just hours ago, he had been living his ordinary life, stuck in his routine. Now, he was offering a stranger and two children a place to stay, something he had never done before. There was a feeling of satisfaction in his chest, but it wasn't because he had done something special. It was because, in that moment, he had done the right thing. And that felt good. As he finished making the bed, he returned to the living room. You all get some rest, Jake said. I'll be in the other room if you need anything. Evan nodded, his face still drawn with exhaustion. Thank you, you've done more for us than we could have ever expected. Jake smiled, though he felt his own exhaustion creeping in. No need to thank me. Get some sleep. Jake returned to his room and laid down on his own bed. He was tired, but his mind raced. It wasn't just the long day that kept him awake. It was the way things had shifted so suddenly. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he had done something that mattered. And that feeling, no matter how small, gave him a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. The morning came quickly, and Jake awoke to the sounds of soft murmurs from the living room. He stretched, rubbing his eyes, and noticed that the apartment was still eerily quiet. He got up slowly, making his way to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. As he moved, he couldn't help but think about how much had changed in just one night. He had always kept to himself, never one to go out of his way to help others. But something about Evan and the kids had struck a chord with him. By the time the coffee was brewed, Jake heard the faint shuffle of footsteps from the living room. He turned and saw Evan standing in the doorway, looking much more rested than he had the night before. His tired eyes were still there, but there was a glimmer of hope now. Morning, Jake said with a smile, handing Evan a mug of coffee. How'd you all sleep? Evan looked a little embarrassed, but he smiled back. Better than we have. In a long time. I don't think the kids woke up once last night. That's good to hear, Jake replied, grateful that they had found at least one night of peace. The kids were still asleep, curled up together on the couch. Their small bodies were wrapped in the blanket Jake had given them, looking innocent and peaceful. It was hard to believe how much they had been through, how much they'd suffered, and yet here they were, still holding on. As Jake prepared breakfast, the two men talked quietly, sharing stories. Evan spoke of the life he used to have, a steady job, a home, and a family. But the loss of his wife had changed everything. The world he knew had crumbled, and he was left with nothing but the responsibility of raising two children on his own. Jake couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for him. Life had been hard on Jake too, but hearing Evan's story made him realize how fortunate he was in his own way. He still had his job, his independence, even if it was tough. Evan's situation, on the other hand, felt like it had gone from bad to worse. I've been trying to find work, but it's tough, Evan explained, looking down at the floor. No one seems to want to hire me. I don't have much to offer, and the kids, they make things more complicated. Jake nodded, understanding the weight of Evan's words. He knew how hard it was to find stability, especially in a world that seemed to overlook people who were struggling. You've got to keep trying, Jake said with a steady tone. Something will come up. Evan looked at Jake, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know, he muttered. I've been at it for months, and it feels like I'm just running in place. Jake sat down across from him, the weight of his own life settling on his shoulders. He wasn't exactly rich, but he had a car, a roof over his head, and a steady job, even if it wasn't glamorous. He couldn't imagine losing everything and being left with nothing but the love for his kids and the will to survive. "If you need anything, just ask," Jake said, looking Evan in the eyes. "I may not have much, but I can help you out if I can. Maybe I can even help you find some work around here. It's not much, but it's a start." Evan's face softened, a mix of surprise and gratitude crossing his expression. "You'd do that for me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Jake replied simply. "We all need help sometimes. Besides, you've got 2 kids depending on you. I can't just let you fall through the cracks." There was a moment of silence between them, a silent understanding passing between the 2 men. Jake wasn't sure where this was going, but something told him that he couldn't turn his back on Evan and the kids. As the morning passed, the small apartment began to feel a little more like a home. The warmth of the breakfast, the quiet conversations, and the presence of these 3 people who had started out as strangers but were becoming something more, something like family. Jake couldn't help but wonder if this was what he had been missing all along. Maybe helping others wasn't just about making a difference in their lives. Maybe it was about making a difference in his own too. The next few days passed in a blur. Before responding, "Look, you're not a burden. You're a person who's down on their luck, just like anyone else could be. I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because I want to. Because you're not the only one who needs help. We all do sometimes." Evan's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly, though it was clear that the guilt still lingered. Jake understood. He had felt the same way many times in his life. There was a fine line between accepting help and feeling helpless, and it wasn't always easy to cross. The next day, Jake decided to take action. He had been thinking about it for a while, and he knew it was time to try something. He walked into his boss's office during his lunch break and asked about any extra work that might be available. "You know, I could use some help around the shop," his boss said, glancing up from the paperwork. "We've had a couple of big projects come in. If you know anyone looking for work, we could use a hand." Jake's heart raced. This could be it. "Actually," Jake said, "I know someone who's looking for work. A friend of mine. He's a quick learner, good with his hands. He's been struggling, and I think he could really use the chance." His boss nodded thoughtfully. "Well, we're always short on hands. Bring him in, and we'll see what he can do." Jake felt a rush of relief. He hadn't realized how much pressure had been building on him until now. It felt good to be doing something to help. Later that afternoon, he told Evan the good news. "I talked to my boss today," Jake said, his voice light with excitement. "He's got some work for you, if you're interested. It's not much, but it's a start." Evan's face lit up with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Are you serious?" he asked, eyes wide. "You're giving me a chance?" Jake smiled. "Yeah, it's not going to be easy, but it's a chance to get back on your feet. You'll be helping me out, and in return, maybe you can start building something for yourself again." The gratitude in Evan's eyes was overwhelming. "I don't know what to say. Thank you, Jake. You've done more for me and my kids than anyone else ever has. I won't forget this." Jake shrugged, feeling a little awkward with all the thanks. "Just do your best. That's all I'm asking." The next day, Evan showed up at the shop with Jake, nervous but eager. Jake's boss gave him a quick tour and showed him what he'd be working on. The work was tough, but Evan threw himself into it with everything he had. By the end of the week, Jake could already see a change in him. The weight in Evan's shoulders seemed lighter, and there was a spark of determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. As they wrapped up their work that evening, Evan pulled Jake aside. "I just want to say, again, thank you. I don't know how to repay you, but I'll do everything I can to show you how much this means to me." Jake smiled, clapping him on the back. "Don't worry about repayment. Just keep working hard, and things will get better. You've got this." Evan smiled back, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and gratitude. He was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. And for Jake, seeing that glimmer of hope in Evan's eyes made it all worthwhile. The days passed by, and Evan settled into his new routine at the shop. The work was hard, but it was a fresh start, and that made all the difference. Jake had noticed a subtle change in Evan. The weight that had been on his shoulders seemed to lessen with each passing day. He was no longer the man who had arrived in the middle of the storm, broken and desperate. Now, he was someone who had a purpose again. Every morning, Evan showed up on time, worked diligently, and gave everything he had. The kids, too, were slowly adjusting. They had started going to a nearby school, thanks to the help of a few local volunteers who made sure they had the supplies they needed. Lily and Noah were starting to look like kids again, laughing, playing, and even talking about their day when they came home. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for Jake, he began to feel a sense of pride. Not only had he helped someone in need, but he had seen Evan work hard to build a life for himself and his children. The small apartment no longer felt like just a place where people slept. It had become a home, a real home. One evening, as Jake was finishing up dinner, Evan came into the kitchen with a smile on his face. "Jake, I wanted to talk to you about something," Evan said, sounding a little hesitant. Jake turned from the stove, wiping his hands on a towel. "Sure, what's up?" "I've been thinking," Evan started, taking a deep breath, "about how much you've done for us. I can't thank you enough. But I want to make sure I'm not just taking from you. I want to do something, give back." Jake chuckled softly. "You've already done plenty. You're working hard, getting back on your feet, and that's more than enough." Evan shook his head, a determined look in his eyes. "No, I mean it. I want to do more than just work. I want to contribute. I've been saving up a little from my paychecks, and I want to help out with the bills. I can't let you keep supporting us without doing something in return." Jake's heart warmed at Evan's words. It was clear that Evan had not only gained a sense of responsibility for his own life, but also for the people around him. "Evan, I appreciate it," Jake said, "but you don't have to. The fact that you're working hard and taking care of the kids is enough for me." Evan smiled, but didn't seem convinced. "I know, but I want to make sure you don't feel like this is one-sided." Jake met his gaze and felt a sense of gratitude for the man who had come into his life unexpectedly. "All right," Jake said. "How about we work out a plan where we both contribute what we can? I'll keep helping you, but if you want to pitch in for the bills, that's up to you. Just don't feel like you have to do everything." Evan's eyes softened with understanding. "Thanks, Jake. I'll do my best." As the weeks went by, things continued to improve for everyone. Evan's hard work at the shop paid off. His boss recognized his dedication and offered him a raise. It wasn't much, but it was a step in the right direction. The kids were adjusting better at school, and Jake was relieved to see them finally starting to make friends. One evening, as Jake and Evan sat down to a meal together, Evan looked at him and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be in a place like this. I never thought I'd be able to make a living again, or see my kids safe and happy. I don't know how to express how much this means to me." Jake smiled, raising his glass in a small toast. "You've earned it, and you've done the hard part. All I did was give you a chance." Evan looked down at his plate for a moment, then looked back up at Jake, a smile on his face. "You gave me more than that. You gave me hope, and that's more than I could have asked for." The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft clinking of silverware against plates. Jake felt a deep sense of fulfillment, something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just helping Evan and the kids. He was building a connection with them that was becoming more and more meaningful. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt that his life was truly making a difference. It wasn't just about getting by anymore. It was about giving, about helping others find their way, just as he had been helped along the way by people who cared. And as he looked across the table at Evan and the kids, he realized that, maybe, just maybe, he had found something far more valuable than any paycheck or material possession, a sense of purpose. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Jake wasn't afraid of it. He knew that as long as they had each other, they would find a way to face whatever came their way. As the weeks turned into months, Jake found himself adjusting to a new rhythm in life. Things were still far from perfect, but there was a sense of stability now that had been absent for so long. Evan was thriving in his new job, slowly becoming a reliable part of the team. His confidence grew with each paycheck, each new task he learned. The children, Lily and Noah, were adjusting too, becoming more comfortable at school and even making friends. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living, truly living. One evening, Jake returned home from a long day at work, the garage doors creaking as he parked his car in the driveway. It had become a familiar sound over the past few months, a sign of the life that had taken root here. He opened the door, expecting the usual quiet of an empty apartment, but was greeted by the sound of laughter. The kids were playing in the living room, their laughter echoing off the walls. Evan was sitting on the couch, watching them, his eyes full of contentment. Jake smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Hey," he said, taking off his jacket and hanging it on the hook by the door. "What's going on in here?" Lily and Noah jumped up, running toward him. "Hi, Uncle Jake," Lily exclaimed, a big grin on her face. "We made a fort. Yeah, and we're having a picnic," Noah added, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Jake chuckled, kneeling down to give them both a hug. "A picnic, huh? What's on the menu?" "Cookies," Noah said proudly, holding up a plate with a few half-eaten cookies. "We made them all by ourselves." Jake looked over at Evan, who had a soft smile on his face. "You've got some talented little bakers here." Evan chuckled. They've been trying to make their own cookies for a while now. It's their new thing. Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. It was moments like this that reminded him of how much had changed, how far they had come. The apartment that had once felt empty and cold now felt like a home. There was laughter, there was warmth, and there was love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Jake and Evan sat at the kitchen table. Jake was sipping his coffee, while Evan was looking at something in his phone, a serious expression on his face. Jake noticed the change in his demeanor and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Evan looked up from his phone, his eyes momentarily distant. "Yeah, just thinking. It's been a while since I've heard from my brother. I'm just worried." Jake set his cup down, sensing the unease in Evan's voice. "Do you want to talk about it?" Evan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I haven't heard from him in months. He used to be the one I turned to when things got rough. But, I don't know. It's like he's disappeared." Jake leaned forward, his concern growing. "Have you tried reaching out to him?" "I've called, sent messages, but nothing. I don't know what happened." Evan's voice trailed off, and for a moment, there was a heavy silence in the room. Jake sat quietly, giving Evan the space he needed. It was clear that this was something that weighed on him heavily, something he hadn't spoken about before. Finally, Jake spoke up. "You're not alone in this, Evan. If you need to talk, if you need help, I'm here. You've done so much for us, but you don't have to carry all this on your own." Evan looked at Jake, the tension in his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thanks, Jake. I mean it. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jake smiled, a warm, reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. We're family now. That's what family does for each other." Evan nodded, his face softening with gratitude. "Yeah, you're right. I guess I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until now." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from a deeper understanding, a bond that had grown between them over the past few months. In that moment, Jake realized that the changes in their lives weren't just about survival. It wasn't about getting by anymore. It was about building something new together, something stronger than what they had before. As the night wore on, Jake felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. He was no longer just living day by day, hoping for things to get better. He was part of something bigger now, and that made all the difference. As the months continued to pass, things seemed to settle into a comfortable routine. Jake could feel the weight of the past few months lifting. It wasn't just the change in his life that mattered. It was the way Evan, Lily, and Noah had become part of his life. The small apartment, once so quiet and lonely, now felt like home, a real home, with the sounds of children's laughter, the smell of food cooking, and the shared moments of peace. But even in the comfort of this newfound stability, there was still a lingering sense of worry in the air. Evan's brother, whom he hadn't heard from in months, still haunted his thoughts. Jake could see the tension whenever Evan's phone buzzed or when his eyes would drift to the door, waiting for a message, a call, or some sign of life from his family. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the living room, Jake sat on the couch, watching as Noah and Lily worked on a drawing at the table. They were happy, more carefree than they had been in the past. Jake glanced over at Evan, who was sitting in the chair across from him, his brow furrowed as he looked through his phone once again. Still no word. Jake asked gently, his voice soft but laced with concern. Evan looked up, giving him a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No. I've tried calling again, but nothing. I don't know what's going on." There was a pause, a heavy silence filling the space between them. Jake could feel the frustration building inside Evan, and he could see the way it was wearing him down. "Maybe he's just busy or something," Jake suggested, though he knew it wasn't a simple case of being too busy. It was clear Evan had always turned to his brother in times of need, and the silence felt like an unanswered question. "I hope so," Evan said, his voice quiet. "But it's been months, Jake. I just don't know what happened." Jake sat back, trying to think of something to say that could ease the worry, but nothing came to mind. Sometimes, life threw things at you that couldn't be explained, that couldn't be fixed with words. He reached over, placing a hand on Evan's shoulder. "Whatever happens, you're not alone," Jake said, his voice steady and firm. "You've got me, and you've got the kids. We're in this together, okay?" Evan looked at Jake, his eyes searching for something in Jake's face. He found it. There was no judgment, no pity, just a quiet promise that Jake was there for him, no matter what. Slowly, Evan nodded. "I don't know what I'd do without you, man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Jake smiled, squeezing his shoulder. "You don't need to worry about that. We're family now." As the evening continued, the kids finished their drawing and showed it to Jake. It was a colorful mess of shapes and lines, but to them, it was a masterpiece. They giggled, waiting for Jake's approval, and he leaned in, offering them a grin. "It's amazing," he said, his voice filled with pride. The kids beamed with joy, their faces lighting up. It was moments like these that reminded Jake just how much he had gained. It wasn't just the changes in Evan's life, it was the changes in his own life, the way he had started to see things differently. The noise of the world, the stress of survival, the worry, it all seemed a little quieter now, a little easier to handle. That night, as Jake lay in bed, his thoughts drifted back to Evan's brother. He knew it wasn't easy for Evan, not knowing what had happened, but Jake also knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. He had given Evan and the kids a chance to start over, but in return, they had given him something just as valuable, something he hadn't realized he was missing until now, a sense of connection, of purpose, of belonging. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the day slip away, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Tomorrow would come, and whatever it brought, Jake knew he was ready. They were ready. Together, they would face whatever came their way. The following days brought with them a sense of quiet progress. Evan had settled more comfortably into his job, and his days were filled with work, while the kids had found their own rhythm at school. The apartment felt full, not just with the sounds of everyday life, but with the sense of shared purpose that Jake hadn't realized he'd been missing. However, there was still that lingering uncertainty hanging over Evan, the worry about his brother that seemed impossible to shake. It wasn't something they often spoke about, but Jake could feel it, especially when the phone buzzed late at night or when Evan stared off into space, lost in thought. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Jake sat on the couch, reading through some old paperwork. He could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sound of a car passing by outside. It was a peaceful, ordinary moment, but the quiet in the apartment felt different that night. Evan had been unusually quiet, his eyes constantly checking his phone, as if expecting something that never came. Finally, Jake set down the papers and looked over at him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Evan didn't immediately respond. He simply sat there for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge of his phone. "I've been thinking about my brother," Evan said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I haven't heard from him in so long, and I don't know what happened. I feel like I've lost him." Jake could hear the pain in Evan's words, the ache of longing for a connection that seemed so far out of reach. He set his paperwork aside and moved to sit next to Evan. "I know it's been tough," Jake said, his voice calm and reassuring. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're not alone in this. You've got the kids, and you've got me. We're here for you always." Evan turned to look at Jake, his eyes a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I know," he said quietly, "and I appreciate everything. I feel like I should be able to fix this. I should be able to find him, to make things right." Jake placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. "Sometimes, we can't fix everything, Evan. Some things are beyond our control. But what we can do is keep moving forward, together." There was a long pause, and Evan nodded, though the weight of his thoughts still seemed to press down on him. Jake didn't have all the answers, but he knew that the most important thing was to be there for each other, especially when things felt uncertain. The days that followed were filled with the usual hustle and bustle of daily life, but there was a new sense of determination in the air. Evan kept pushing forward, focusing on his work, while Jake continued to support him in whatever way he could. It wasn't easy, but they were building something solid, something real. One afternoon, as Jake returned home from work, he saw Evan standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of surprise and something else. Relief, maybe. "Jake," Evan said, his voice a little shaky. "You won't believe it. I got a message." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "From your brother?" he asked, his voice suddenly filled with anticipation. Evan nodded, holding up his phone. "He's alive. He's been trying to reach me. Something happened, and he's been out of touch. But he's okay. He's okay, Jake." Jake's heart soared with relief. He stood up and pulled Evan into a hug, something he hadn't done in a long time. "I'm so glad, Evan. I knew he'd come through." Evan's voice cracked as he spoke. "I didn't know if I'd ever hear from him again. But now I have a chance to make things right. To fix things with him." Jake smiled, stepping back to look at his friend. "You've always had a chance, Evan. You just had to keep going." Evan smiled, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. "Yeah," he said softly. "I guess I just needed to believe it." That evening, as they sat down for dinner together, the apartment was filled with a new sense of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were still challenges ahead, but they had made it this far. The family they had created, the bonds they had formed, were stronger than ever. And for the first time in a long time, Jake realized that it wasn't just about surviving. It was about building a future, one step at a time, and knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The relief that Evan felt after hearing from his brother was something Jake couldn't ignore. The change in him was noticeable, his usual tension replaced by a cautious optimism. Though he still didn't have all the answers, the uncertainty that had hung over him for months had started to lift. For the first time in a long while, Evan allowed himself to breathe, to believe that things could be better. The phone calls between Evan and his brother were slow at first, filled with hesitation and emotion. They talked about the things they had missed, the things that had gone wrong. But there was also a sense of healing in the air. Evan had learned a lot about himself in the time they had been apart. He had learned that survival wasn't enough. It was about connection, about forgiveness, about moving forward, no matter the past. As for Jake, he found that his own life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into something much deeper. He no longer felt the weight of his past failures or the loneliness that had once consumed him. He had become part of a family that had its struggles but also its triumphs. And those triumphs, big or small, were what mattered. One afternoon, as the weather began to warm up and spring started to settle in, Jake decided to take the kids to the park. It was a simple idea, but one that felt right. The kids had been talking about playing outside for days, and Jake knew it was the perfect opportunity to spend some quality time together. As they walked to the park, Lily and Noah ran ahead, laughing and playing, their carefree energy infectious. Evan walked beside Jake, the two of them chatting about the progress at the shop and how things were looking brighter every day. "I can't believe how much things have changed," Evan said, looking over at Jake. "Just a few months ago, I never would have thought I'd be here. I didn't think I had a chance." Jake smiled, watching the kids ahead. "I think you just needed to see it for yourself, Evan. Sometimes, we all need a little help to find our way." "Yeah, you're right," Evan agreed. "And I can't thank you enough for being there. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jake shook his head, smiling. "You don't have to thank me. We've all been through things. The important part is that we're here now, together." The park was alive with the sounds of children playing, families enjoying the sunny day, and the occasional laughter echoing in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, everything felt normal. The kind of normal that Jake had always wanted. Simple, full of love, and not marred by the worries of the past. As Jake sat on a bench, watching the kids play, he realized how much he had gained from this experience. It wasn't just about the good moments they shared, but about the growth they had all gone through. Evan had learned to open up again, to trust, and to believe in himself. The kids had found stability, laughter, and joy in their everyday lives. And Jake had learned that helping others wasn't just about giving. It was about receiving too. He had gained a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to care for someone beyond himself. Later that evening, as they headed back home, the kids tired from their time at the park, Evan turned to Jake once more. "You know," he said, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. About moving forward together. Jake looked at him, curious. What about it? I think that's what we're doing, Jake. Moving forward. We're not stuck anymore. We've got a future now. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his chest. We do, Evan. And we're going to make it a good one. As they walked into the apartment, the sound of the door closing behind them felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A chapter filled with hope, family, and the kind of strength that only comes when you have the people who matter most by your side. And for Jake, that was all he needed to know. No matter what came next, he was ready for it, because he wasn't facing it alone. Together, they had already overcome so much, and the future was theirs to shape.